Welcome everyone to DotVVM Community Meetup. Today we have two sessions prepared for you. First will be about how we are building and releasing the DotVVM for Visual Studio extension, which Andre will be talking about. And then we have our developer advocate, Daniel, who will be showing some demos of how to export data to Excel using DotVVM Business Pack controls. So I think that we can start right away. So I'm giving the word now to Andre. So Andre, you can share your screen.
Okay, thank you. So let me share my screen first. Okay, this is the one. So hopefully you can see my presentation.
Yeah,
that's fine.
Right.
Okay, great. Okay, so once again, hello everyone, and thanks for having me on this meetup. As been already said, my name is Andre, and today I'll be talking to you about our Visual Studio extension for .vvm, and more specifically, we will be talking about our release process. How does it look like? How can you easily ensure without a great hassle, like how to be on the latest update of Visual Studio extension? Where do we publish these extensions, and where you can find some further information about individual builds. And then I'll be talking a bit about what are some specifics or sort of behind the scenes about developing this Visual Studio extension for .vvm. And we will also take a close look at what's sort of new in this area and what have we been working on for the past couple of weeks, let's say. So I'll start with the release process because I figured it could be a nice topic, since I think it was just last week that I've been made aware by one of my colleagues that not even everybody in the company that's Riganti behind the .vvm project, not everyone there knew how our release process looks like, and we're running some older versions of extensions. So I figured this could be a nice topic. So let's get straight into it. So our release process. Whenever we publish a extension, the first and obvious destination where it needs to go is, of course, Visual Studio Marketplace. So this is the portal that I'm pretty sure everybody knows. It's the common place where you can find many great extensions, not only for the full Visual Studio, but also for Visual Studio Code. So yeah, I mean, it's a really nice portal, but however, since we are developing a bit more complex extension, it does not provide all the necessary information that we would like it to provide. So the most important thing is right here. It says that this extension works with Visual Studio 2022, which is of course true, but it's not the complete information, because we sometimes have to publish specific builds for specific versions, because, as I'll be talking a bit later about, we rely basically on some not yet standardized API, which can sometimes get broken, and we need to adjust and provide updates. So if you want to know where to find further information about individual releases, right now we are basically maintaining also our documentation page. So if you visit the documentation page under the .vvm for Visual Studio, there is a site called Release Notes, and here is basically listed we list there all versions that we've recently released. And you can find some further information. So for example, what was changed in these versions in comparison to their previous ones. So for example, we added some new features, fixed a bunch of bugs, and most importantly, there is this compatibility section that you can check whether your Visual Studio is actually compatible with this build. What does this section mean is basically we built our source against these specific Visual Studio versions. So that means that if you have this version of Visual Studio extension for .vvm and have one of these Visual Studios installed, basically you know that you have no compatibility issues because that's the same Visual Studio that we built against and we tested against. So there shouldn't be any issues whatsoever. And also, if you are wondering how we are actually versioning our Visual Studio extensions, like right now, there is latest extension is 4.0.544.0. The first two numbers are basically corresponding to the .vvm framework version. So this extension basically targets .vvm framework 4.0. And the third number is just our internal build incrementer, so that we can distinguish between individual builds. The fourth letter, number is not really frequently used. We just use it for some internal builds or some release candidates and so on. But you most commonly see those first three numbers so that you know what they mean if you were wondering. So so much for versioning and our release notes. So if you want to know what's changed in individual extension builds, just go to our documentation pages and it should be there. Also, if you have some compatibility issues, just ensure that you are using compatible versions. And while this is certainly a bit better compared to Visual Studio Marketplace, it's still not everything that you can do. There are more convenient ways on how to update Visual Studio extension. But first, I would like to show you where you can actually check against these versions. So whether you use the About button in your Visual Studio installations or you just run the Visual Studio installer, you can basically pretty easily find out on what version of Visual Studio you are currently running, and then just basically download the version that is working with your Visual Studio. And the great thing in comparison as to one of my previous slides where here it was just stating that this works with Visual Studio 2022, this will actually tell you the exact version. So this compatibility information, we are maintaining it to be exact, correct, so you can rely on it. But I'm well aware that like waking up every day and checking our release notes is not really feasible and not something everybody wants to do. So I would like to show you some recommendations on how to keep your extensions basically updated all the time without too much of a work. So, okay, so unless you haven't updated your Visual Studios for like a couple past years, you probably all have this highlighted information, option in your Manage Extensions dialog within your Visual Studio, which basically allows you to tick this option for individual installed extensions that you want them to be updated automatically. And this is a great way to keep your extension updated, of course. And if you are wondering what with the compatibility with Visual Studio, we will go over that in the next slide. So the easiest approach that I can provide to you is to check that automatic updates on Visual Studio extensions for .vvm. And whenever this update is available, and it will be basically installed once you restart your Visual Studio, you can also know that, yeah, this is the point where I can also update Visual Studio, because we always build our extension against the newest patch of Visual Studio, newest versions. And we, of course, support two latest major versions, so Visual Studio 2022, Visual Studio 2019, and we also provide builds for Visual Studio 2022 preview. So this is the easiest way. Just check automatic updates, and whenever your extension gets updated, also update your Visual Studio, and you will never run into compatibility issues. However, this is of course not the only approach, and if you prefer manual updates, just make sure to always consult our release notes. There you can find if the update that you are willing to do is compatible or not. And if you are doing manual updates of Visual Studio, especially if it's a bigger update, just be sure to wait, let's say like 2 or 3 days, so that we can also update and check if our extension works. And if it doesn't, we will immediately issue an update. This is really important because we do not get notifications from Visual Studio team whatsoever about upcoming updates. We cannot test them in advance. So we are just as other users. Whenever there is an update, we need to install it, test our extension, and if it doesn't work, then update it a bit later. And why this updating is important for us, I'll be talking on further slides, like what does it actually take, what are the challenges to develop a extension for Visual Studio. But these, in this summary, are the key steps on how to ensure that you are running latest software possible. Just pick your favorite approach, and I'm pretty sure that it should work just fine. Yeah. So this is so much for our release process. Just to summarize, we publish every extension to Visual Studio Marketplace. We also maintain our release notes. You can find some further information there. And if you are updating, there is this automatic option that will really make your life easier. And once we publish updates for our Visual Studio extension for .vvm, you can also update your Visual Studio and it will run into no problems. So yeah, this is our release process. Hopefully, if anything wasn't clear, I hope now it's a bit more clear. And of course, if you have any questions, just as always, don't forget to write us either on GitHub, Gitter, or really any medium that .vvm team is on. And right now, I would like to continue to development overview. How does it actually look? What's special about developing extensions for Visual Studio? But first, I'll talk about a couple of new things that happen to our Visual Studio extensions. So we will go over some news and also news to our documentations page. So in the most recent version, we added support for composite controls. And if you are not yet familiar with those, this is a new feature that has been added to .vvm framework 4.0. It's a great new feature that allows an easier way to write controls into .vvm. It takes much less code and is really, I think, way easier. This feature is already getting use in some packages, and I think that on the previous meetup, there's been a talk by Tomasz about Auto UI that is also utilizing these composite controls. And since the latest version of Visual Studio extension, you can also play with them because they're already well supported. Stuff like syntax highlighting and IntelliSense for individual properties is already working. We fixed a bunch of bugs in various commands. I can even maybe show you some. So I have here my Visual Studio. We previously had some broken commands. Those should be now working. So for example, if you are on a page, you can really quickly go to your view model just by pressing F7. If you want to go back to the page, you just press Shift F7 and you are right back. We also fixed and made some adjustments to other commands such as go to definition. So right now you can see that I am on this view model definition. So if I press F12 now, it also takes me to the view model. But if I press F12, for example, on this property, it will take me into the definition of that property. So yeah, there have been some changes. Stuff should be working now. Also, various dialogues have been enhanced and should be working better. Overall, many commands have been fixed and a bit improved. So, I mean, of course, if you find any issues, don't forget to let us know and we will fix them as well. And yeah, so what are the next changes? Yeah, so we did also some minor other changes. So for example, we removed some culture sensitive string operations, which was troubling some users, especially with default culture settings to set to some language that had different handling for common string operations as we are used to, for example, in English culture or in invariant culture. So this was unified so that these users hopefully experience these issues no more. And I also wanted to showcase that there has been some work on .vvm documentation in terms of a new banner. There will be now displayed a new banner for every upcoming meetup. So as you can see from the image below, today is the June 23rd, 5 p.m. Central European time. So yeah, right now there should be banners that will be notifying you about upcoming .vvm meetups. So you can get notified in this way as well. Okay, so there's been some news and updates, and now let's take a look at what's so special about Visual Studio SDK and why they tend to break us sometimes with updates, and we need to perform updates as well. So Visual Studio SDK is a really nice software development kit that makes it possible for you to extend the capabilities of Visual Studio and also integrate some new features. It allows you to define new commands. You can know them from our extensions of, for example, commands such as add new page, extract control, or whatever. New windows, IntelliSense provider, custom project types. You probably know many of these features from the .vvm Visual extension. However, what makes development of Visual Studio extensions hard is the fact that the documentation of their APIs is often unavailable. A whole Visual Studio is running on .NET Framework, so Visual Studio extensions also have to target .NET Framework, and some of their API is internal only, or not strictly internal, but let's say that's subject to change at almost any time. And this is the source of problems with the compatibility. And we need to use this API at some point. So for example, when it comes to the HTML editor, this is a component in the Visual Studio that is really crucial for us because we need to integrate on it to provide syntax highlighting and IntelliSense capabilities. However, this is partly internal, so when they make changes, it can break us. And this is also the reason why I told you that whenever there is an update, it's always better to wait for, let's say, 2 or 3 days before we test it ourselves. And if something's not working, we'll fix it and issue an update before you can try it without any problems. And yeah, so what do these updates actually mean to us? If you are wondering, some of them can be really funny. In the ideal world, .vvm, I mean, Visual Studio updates do just nothing, like everything works and we can just focus on the new stuff. However, this is not always the case. They can introduce either binary breaking change, which is really easy on .NET. You just recompile the whole thing and it should work just fine. And however, they can of course introduce some API breaking changes, which are a bit harder to fix because of course you need to investigate how does the new API work, or is there an alternative and stuff like that. So it takes some time, but yeah, generally was fixable. The most complicated updates are internal behavior breaking changes, because these are really hard to spot. It compiles just fine, but when you try out some feature, it just doesn't seem to work or behaves weirdly because some internal behavior change was introduced. And yeah, there is not really an easy cure just to debug it and try to fix it. And if you are wondering how can we distinguish this internal behavior breaking change from the binary breaking change or not breaking change whatsoever, then there is not really an easy way. We just need to do a lot of testing. So yeah, this is ultimately the reason why we need to update Visual Studio extension for .vvm sometimes with every version of Visual Studio, because they introduce breaking changes for us. So hopefully this makes it a bit more clear on what does it actually mean to for us to stay compatible with Visual Studio, because they are always one step ahead of us. We are not notified about updates. We cannot try them in advance. So we, as other users, need to install them first and then try if anything was broken. So in conclusion, I would recommend to keep your .vvm Visual Studio extensions up to date. We are introducing many new features, lots of bug fixes, and with the automatic update feature, I think, at least in my opinion, it's pretty easy to keep your software up to date, because not only .vvm Visual Studio extension, but also Visual Studio tends to bring many new quite nice features that are really helpful for development. So it's a good idea to keep both of those as up to date as possible. And also check out our release notes if you are wondering about change logs, what was actually changed between different builds, or need to know if your versions of Visual Studio and Visual Studio extension for .vvm are compatible or not. And yeah, also watch out for our Meetup announcements within documentation. I think it's a really nice way to announce this and make it a bit more available to the .vvm users. So at this point, it's all from me. Thank you for your attention. Of course, if you have any questions, feel free to ask either now or just write us on GitHub, Gitter, or really anywhere. And once again, thank you. And yeah, see you sometime soon.
Thank you very much, Andrea. It was really nice, and I hope that Microsoft will stop making breaking changes that break our extension. That would help everyone, but unfortunately, there is not any better solution than just to keep watching and updating Visual Studio and the extension. Okay, so we can continue with Daniel's session about exporting Excel. exporting data to Excel using .vvm Business Pack.
Hello, everyone. Hola. It's a pleasure to greet you again. I hope you can see my screen and hear me right. And we can get started. In the next few minutes, we can see how to export reports to Excel with .vvm Business Pack. Usually, we have for example, pages with data and grid views. And many times we need a functionality to export our data to Excel or CSV files, for example. And we can consider this option to achieve this goal. So for this, we can consider, in this case, in the .vvm Business Pack library, the functionality of exporting data. The purpose of this functionality is from a grid view with a data source, for example, we can have the functionality to export our data. In this particular case, we will see how to do that to export to Excel files. We can consider this option in the .vvm Business Pack in the 4th version. And to do this, we can consider the next steps to follow. As a first point, we have to add an additional nugget package to our solution, in this particular case, .vvm.businesspack.export.excel, to use this functionality. If we want, for example, to use CSV files in this particular case, we can consider the other extension to install the other nugget package, that is .vvm.businesspack.export.csv, but in this case is for Excel. With this in mind, we can consider implement the Excel export functionality. This particular case is having, in our view, a grid view controller, and also a button, for example, to have the action to export the data. And also, as an additional part, we can configure the Excel exports, the fields, and some logic parts that we can consider. So to achieve this, we will see a .vvm demo that you can also see in the .vvm web page to see how it works. So I have a solution in this part, and practically we have to consider two parts here. As I mentioned before, as a first point, the grid view, and the most important part here, one ID to identify this particular grid view, and also we have to consider, for example, a button here to call to the export function. So in the view model, on this part, we have, let me close this, we have the export method here, and we have to consider some part here. As a first point, to get the grid view, we can have, or we can achieve that by getting the grid view by its ID, in this particular case, with the grid value here, to obtain this grid view. And why we need this grid view? We need this grid view because we will have, or we can consider the format of this grid view. For example, in this grid view, we have these columns here, begin date, this example. And the same columns, we will export this. For example, we have 5 columns here in this grid view, and in our reports, we will have the same 5 columns to export. This is the main reason that we need this grid view. Then we have to prepare the data. As a first point, have the format of the data with the data model, for example, this model here, to have the attributes that we can consider for the data set. Then we can, or we have to load all the data. We can consider, for example, in this case, we have a random dates or data, sorry, to have our data source. As an additional part, we can configure our exports settings. As a first point, for example, we can say, we want to have a title in the Excel, and the table can start in the field, for example, in the position 3, 1, in the row and column. And then we can consider, for example, the format of the values. For example, for the date is in the data time format, and the other values as well. So as in the Excel, we can consider, for example, take one column and add all values and present here, for example, and many configurations that we can consider in this part. With this configuration, we can set up an export data, and then with this export data, return the file to the user. In this particular case, exporting with this configuration, export with the grid view and the dataset format, prepare a file, and then return this file to the user to export the Excel. So let me run this demo and show you one example here. So we can expect have the grid view and the button to export the functionality. Let me load this page and load the Excel. Okay. We can see this example with many data here, and this is the data. We will export many of this data, and this is the button to export the data to, in this way, calling to the export method in the view model. We have the Excel here, the file, and we will have the configuration that we set up previously in the export method in the view model. You can remember here the title that we can consider and the same columns that we have in the grid view, these ones. And we can add in the settings some validations, and also, for example, to color these cells here, and the other one that we add here, for example, add the entry column in this part. And in this is the easy way to export our data from a grid view, considering collection of the data, and using this functionality in the DotVVM Business Pack. And that's all. For example, if you want to use this demo and consider other ones, for example, you can go to the dotvvm.com page, and here you can go to the samples option, and we can have, or we can see here many demos. This particular one is in the section .vvm Business Pack for enhancement. We can show the instruction here, or we can go to the repository directly in this part. And this is the example that we see in these few minutes. This one. So that's all. I hope that you consider this functionality very useful to export data, and also you can consider other demos here as well. If you have questions, comments, ideas, you are free to ask.
And I would like just to add that under the hood, the Business Pack Excel export library, it's using the open source library called closed XML, and there are some extensibility points. So at any point during the export, you can use all closed XML API to do any kind of manipulation with the Excel file. So if you want to add some charts and other things, closed XML has API for that. So you don't have to be worried that there will be some things that are not possible to do, because the library underneath is very powerful.
Yeah, in the future, I know that there is plans, for example, to export also to PDF files in the future functionalities as well. Yeah,
And
this is very useful in our projects.
okay, so if there are no questions, then that's not a problem. Here are some links that you can use. You can see the homepage, you can see the documentation and our GitHub repo, and also there is a Gitter chat. So if you go to our GitHub, there is a link to the chat. So feel free to ask any questions there. The entire .vvm team is watching the chat, so we will be happy to talk or to explain or respond to any questions. Okay, so thank you very much for staying with us. We are doing these meetups every month, always fourth Thursday in every month. So stay tuned and follow us on Twitter or YouTube, where you will also find the recordings of these community meetups and other events. And also, I would like to invite you to another event, which will be happening on 20th July, because .NET Foundation is organizing one-day online .NET Foundation Summit. Their website is not public yet, but they will publish it in a few days. And .vvm will have one slot there, so we will be showing all the features of .vvm. It's mainly for people who don't know .vvm yet, but if you have any colleagues that didn't try .vvm, you can tell them about this event, and they can see what can .vvm offer to them. So hopefully I will see we will see some new members of the community on that event. Okay, so thank you very much, and take care, and see you on some other .vvm events. Thank you.